Refugees caught up in Libya's civil war. At least 44 people die in an airstrike on a migrant centre in Tripoli, in what the UN calls a war crime. Who's behind the attack and how will it affect efforts to end the conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. African migrants have become the latest victims of Libya's civil war. At least 44 people died in an airstrike on a detention centre in the capital, Tripoli. The UN special envoy to Libya is calling it a war crime. And the UN-recognised government in Tripoli is blaming warlord Khalifa Haftar, whose forces have been fighting to seize the city. The victims are among tens of thousands of Africans hoping to cross the Mediterranean Sea to start a new life in Europe. Alexia O'Brien has more.
Traumatised and scared, they wait outside the migrant camp that was their temporary home. They're among the hundreds of thousands who've come to Libya in search of a better life across the sea in Europe. For some here, that dream is now over, victims of a conflict that has nothing to do with them. This is the centre just a few months ago, full of people who've spent days or weeks travelling through the desert, often in brutally hot temperatures and at the hands of smugglers. It's thought about 600 people were living here. The part that was hit in an airstrike late on Tuesday night held about 150 men, refugees and migrants, many from West Africa.
All what we know is we want UN to help people out of this place because this place is dangerous. We don't have any power to do anything. So there's small children and there's some people that stranded here. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. Like me, I don't know what to go. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go.
The UN-recognised government in Tripoli is blaming rival forces for the attack, saying it was deliberate. The situation in Libya has become increasingly volatile since April, when forces loyal to warlord Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive to control the capital. Hundreds of people have been killed and tens of thousands displaced in the fighting. Haftar's forces, most of whom are part of the self-declared Libyan National Army, have carried out several air raids on Tripoli in recent days, after losing the town of Kharian nearby. The violence has worsened the suffering in migrant detention centres, some close to the front lines, which house those pushed back by the European-funded Libyan Coast Guard. The UN's described the conditions in the centres as appalling, with little food and water, repeatedly calling for them to be closed.
People are being brought to the detention centres faster than we can evacuate them. They're being brought to Libya after being rescued or intercepted by the Libyan Coast Guard at a rate that's quicker than we can get people out. So we need a new policy there. We need to see a renewed effort that sees an end to people being returned to Libya. No refugee should be returned to Libya at this time.
There's growing condemnation of Tuesday's attack and calls for someone to be found accountable. But for now, these migrants are stuck in the middle of Libya's rivals and their battle for control. Alexia O'Brien for Inside Story.
Khalifa Haftar's offensive on Tripoli has derailed a UN peace initiative to reconcile Libya's rival powers. There's the UN-recognised government led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj in Tripoli, the capital in the west. The government of national accord is backed by most Western nations, as well as Qatar and Turkey. And in the east of Libya, there's the Tobruk-based parliament, the centre of power for Khalifa Haftar. He's backed by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, as well as France and Russia. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us in Paris, Mustafa Fattouri, academic and contributor to Al Monitor news website. In San Antonio, Texas, Mansour El Kikhia, professor of politics at the University of Texas at San Antonio and author of Libya's Gaddafi, The Politics of Contradiction. And in London, Anas El Gomati, founder and director of Sadeq Institute, the first public policy think tank in Libya. I'd like to begin in San Antonio first. Mansour El Kikhia. This has been called a war crime by the United Nations. Why hasn't Khalifa Haftar responded to the charges coming from Tripoli saying that he was behind this attack?
Well, first of all, I think you're much too soon in describing the United Nations saying it's a war crime. I mean, the facts on the ground have not been ascertained until now. Let's first of all ascertain who fired those things. If Haftar fired it, then perhaps you can say that. But until that happens, let's just wait before you call him a war criminal or not. I don't support what was done, killing those refugees. But I think, first of all, we have to see who was responsible for this, because before the same thing happened, both sides blamed the others for atrocities they committed. So I think we just hold off on this for just a second.
Anas Al-Gomati in London, Tripoli has been very quick to assign blame for this. It just goes to show that Libya's various parties are far from reconciled on any of this. But no evidence has been put forward for this. Now, what happens next? What's the next move for Tripoli to prove if this was indeed Khalifa Haftar?
Well, it's certainly not difficult to decisively and to conduct an investigation to conclude which of the warring parties was involved in this. The LNA's Air Force has been conducting air raids in Jazeera, in that district. It was an air raid conducted against the Demand Group, which is an armed brigade that is known as the Counter-Migration Brigade, and it was targeting their complex. So I think it would be stupidity of the highest order for the GNA, for the internationally backed government, to strike its own forces. And I think the logical conclusion is that it was either an LNA airstrike from Al Woutia Air Base, which is coming from western Libya, or there was a drone strike from eastern Libya and Al Khadim Air Base. But an investigation to conduct, or at least conducting an investigation that would determine with some degree of proof from where the SOTs flew from where the drones or the UAVs or the MiGs that left these air bases, where it came from, and I think even the shrapnel of the missiles that were struck would give some degree of evidence as to where those airstrikes were launched from.
Well, that's a very interesting point, Mansour El Kikhia. There are military camps near where this detention facility is. I've actually visited detention facilities like this in Libya. The conditions are incredibly bad. But why have them so close to military facilities? Is it simply because of a lack of space? And was this a mistake?
I don't think these kind of mistakes happen. I really don't. I think the intention perhaps there was to be close to those refugee camps in case they are hit, and there's even some people wishing that they would be hit so that Haftar would be blamed. I don't see mistakes in these kind of things. I think if it was done, then it was done deliberate. If it was not done, then they didn't do it. But this is the issue of war. You're dealing with a conflict that there's no border, there's no lines, then there's no actual combatants which you can say this one belongs to that and this one belongs to that. You don't. This is a problem with civil wars such as the one that we have in Libya today.
Anas, let me bring you in here. You were disagreeing there. You were shaking your head. Why were you shaking your head?
Yeah, I think you do. I think the security infrastructure in Libya is well known. The GNA groups that are fighting against Khalifa Haftar in Tripoli are well known. Their locations are well known. But also the infrastructure that houses the barracks, the military barracks, is a limited infrastructure, meaning that certain armed groups or a limited number of armed groups can only house a limited number of complexes. Those complexes are not only used to house the fighting forces in Tripoli, but also housing the specific tasks or the specific designated groups that they're supposed to be pursuing, such as the migration or the migrants and refugees that are being pursued by this group, by the Demand Group in Jazeera. That complex is well known. A very nearby complex in Matiga Air Base also hosts a counter-ISIS force that has been capturing ISIS for the last 5 years, and has got a complex within which it holds its own forces, its air force, but also its intelligence units, and the prisons and the detention centres that they use for ISIS. So that architecture is well known. It's certainly well known to the armed groups that are in Tripoli. It's certainly well known to the armed groups that are striking Tripoli from Khalifa Haftar. So there was no mistake. This was a deliberate act, and it was one that was done with. We shouldn't try to paint this as the armed groups are kind of forcibly putting migrants or putting ISIS at risk unnecessarily. The infrastructure is limited, and we know that. But more importantly here is that Khalifa Haftar knows that, and to think about Khalifa Haftar's acts in isolation is morally reprehensible. We know that Khalifa Haftar has not only struck this camp, but was striking camps and his armed groups entered into a camp only 2.5 months ago at the beginning of the conflict in the airport road complex or around the airport road complex and struck at another number of refugees and migrants, killing around 40. So this isn't the first time. It's a deliberate act, and it tells me that it's systematic. The humanitarian support system in Libya was the first to be targeted. Ambulances, ambulance drivers, first the attendee medics. These are the first people that fell during the conflict. So it sounds more like it's systematic than it sounds like an isolated accident or something that was just a mistake and a gaffe that was made on a Tuesday.
Mansour El Kikhia, I see you shaking your head very violently there. Tell me, what's your response?
I'm sorry. It just doesn't make any. I mean, here you want to make Haftar an ogre. Okay, he's an ogre. But listen to me. I don't think people are bloodthirsty just because they're bloodthirsty. I don't think he's going to strike those things because, oh, today I'm going to strike those people out there. That's not true. There must have been a reason for him to strike that area if he did strike that area.
So what's
Are
the
the
reason?
weapons inside there or
So
not?
what's the reason?
The soldiers in there or not? The cache of arms. Something must have been there. He doesn't just sleep overnight and says, oh, tomorrow we're going to strike the refugee camp over there. This is nonsense. Okay, you want to make him an ogre? Fine, make him an ogre. But he's not a bloodthirsty ogre.
Well, until there is an investigation, until we find out actually who was responsible, there is a wider issue here. I just want to bring our guest in Paris here, Mustafa Fatouri. The UN, the United Nations, have been very clear. They've said that these migrants can't keep being returned to Libya. It's putting them at harm's risk, as we've seen by this airstrike, that Libya is not a safe place for these people to go back to. Why are they being forced to go back to Libya?
Well, I think this is one of the arrangements that have been done with the new Libya between the EU, and the new Libya a few years ago, and especially with the Italian government, the new Italian government about 2 years ago, and the arrangement is such that any migrants who are taking off from Libyan shores will be, if they are caught somewhere in the way towards Europe, specifically if they are within the Libyan territorial waters, they will be sent back to Libya. And then the International Organization for Migration, along with the Libyan local authorities, are supposed to take care of them for a while and then reprocess them in some way and probably try to convince as many of them as possible to send them back. And they have been, regular flights taking back migrants to their own countries. But the problem here, I guess, is that will not, of course, solve the migration problem. There will always be migrants in Libya. And unfortunately, there will be more and more tragedies like the one we saw today. Last night, actually, as long as there's a conflict, they are always the vulnerable people. They are the underdogs, and there is no way to stop this. Unfortunately, it's a very tragic event, but there is no other way to prevent it. There's no actual way. The other thing is there's no, if I heard correctly, there was some kind of argument between the guests before I join you. That probably this side can be blamed or that side for this tragedy. I doubt this really. If there is any either of the two sides in Libya, either Mr. Haftar or GNA for allied militias, are actually doing this deliberately. It's very far-fetched idea. Most likely, what they are using is conventional weapons, with very used in specifically random shelling or bombing, like the case at hand seems to be, and nobody will be held responsible at the end of the day for this tragedy. There will never be any kind of independent verification or investigation of what really went on and who's responsible for that. Just like so many other tragedies we have been living with Libya since 2011, unfortunately.
Let me speak to Mansour El Kikhia. There is a resolution to this. If you got all the parties around the table and had a peaceful resolution, a political resolution, then these tragedies would stop happening. Why is that not happening? Why is the peace process seemingly derailed almost at every opportunity?
Because they're two ideologically different perspectives here. Basically, and I'll tell you my perspective, okay, at least. And I think a large number of individuals in my part of the country agree with what I'm saying. I'm a secularist. I want a separation of church and state. And I'm not willing to live under 10th century ideologues. Unfortunately, you have Sarraj dominated by precisely these people. So, I mean, the incompatibility is so clear and every day it's becoming worse and worse and worse. They're not willing to give up their point of view, and the East is not willing to give up its point of view. I mean, ultimately, I hate to say this, and I don't favor it, but ultimately, if it might lead to the breakup of Libya, that's fine. If people are free to live the way they want to, if they want to be an Islamic state, they want to have a theocracy, be my guests, have a theocracy. We won't. Simple as this. And this is the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is that they want to impose upon the East a certain form of government that is based on theocracy. And
us in London, there's no common ground, says our guest in San Antonio. There's no way these parties can reconcile. Is that true?
That's actually not what he's saying. He's actually saying something that is far more dangerous. And I think it comes down to a narrative that has been sold over the last 8 years that in a region of 385 million people in the Middle East and North Africa, that somehow it's either going to be us, the generals, or it's the chaos and tyranny of ISIS. And that seems to be a very narrow way of looking at the world. And we should call it what it is. It's dog whistling, because in the West and in Europe at the moment, there is this rise of populists that also view the world in that way, that Arabs and Muslims can't be Democrats, so they can't do secular democracy, that they can't live under the kind of rules or celebrate the kind of values that we want. And the only people that can do that are apparently the secularists, and the only secularists that are available are the armies and militaries of either Algeria, Libya, Egypt, potentially even in Tunisia next or in Sudan next. So I think that's a really bad argument to make, and I think it's not one that holds truth. The first of the matter is that Khalifa Haftar is not pursuing Salafi jihadists exclusively. He may dog whistle and try to tell everybody in the world that he's pursuing Salafi jihadists, but if we look at the chaos and the anarchy and the carnage that was wreaked upon the place that Mansour El Kikhia is telling us that he lives in from, and that's where he represents, the east of Libya, Benghazi, the birthplace of the revolution, a quote-unquote counter-terrorism operation that was conducted there, displaced 100,000 people from Benghazi. And 100,000 people that in international media were referred to as ISIS or ISIS families by the LNA spokesman, Ahmed Masmari, but in local media were referred to as Turks and Jews, because they're from a different ethno-tribal sect, or rather a different ethno-tribal grouping from the civic tribes of Benghazi, that most of them, or the majority of them, led the revolution or established some of the armed groups. And that was intolerable to the group that Khalifa Haftar holds today, the Bedouin groups that are now in control of Benghazi. And I think that's what we should also be focusing on. In his second operation in Derna, where we were told that it was Al-Qaeda that were in control because that group kicked out ISIS, not Khalifa Haftar. So we couldn't call them ISIS, so we have to call them Al-Qaeda. In that city, at the end of 2018 and early 2019, a quarter of the population is either dead, in jail, or displaced. That doesn't sound like a narrow counter-terrorism fight to me. It sounds like a fight between the local citizens of that place. And if you look at the groups that Khalifa Haftar used to lead that offensive that came from the bordering towns, the Bedouin bordering towns of Ain Mara, when they left Derna after the campaign, they spray-painted "Welcome to the New" Ain Mara over the name of Derna in that city. So let's not dog whistle and call people terrorists, because it's got real-life implications. You're concerned about the polarization, but you're using a word like terrorist. Terrorist isn't just a normal word, it's a pejorative term, and it green-lights drone strikes, it green-lights wholesale executions of people, and that's what we've seen in Benghazi. So please, I would argue and urge Mansour to use less polarizing language and to call things as they are.
Mansour El Kikhia, just very quickly, what's your response?
Sorry. Don't put words in my mouth, okay? I did not say I favor terrorists. I didn't even bring up the word of terrorists. I didn't do any of that, okay?
Living under a 10th century theocracy?
Now you are equating theocracy with terrorism. I'm not. You're doing that.
Sure. Okay.
Iran is a terrorist nation.
It's the 10th century.
Let's bring in Mustafa Faturi here. Mustafa, I want to come to you in Paris now. There has been a complete disagreement between our two guests in San Antonio and in London. I just want to get to the heart of the fact that there seem to be very irreconcilable differences here. How do we get these parties to the table to talk? How do we keep Libya together?
Well, there's no magic to do this. There's no magic way. There's no easy way either. I'm one of the optimistic persons. I would like to see stable and peaceful Libya, and I always wanted this to happen through some kind of political and peace process. But unfortunately, the fact is there is no other way than violence to stabilize Libya and bring back the country. I'm not defending anybody any party to the current conflict around Tripoli. I'm not blaming this side or that side, but eventually there is no other way. And the reason I say this, under the prevailing circumstances, which have, I mean, politically, socially, and security-wise, which we have been living with under Libyans, I mean, since 2012. Under these circumstances, there is no other way to bring about any kind of stability in Libya, unless with violence. I mean, somebody has to beat somebody out of the battle.
This can't be a fight to the death,
democracy,
though. I mean,
or that will lead to something different. I'm not sure. Sorry,
Mustafa. Thank you very much for that. I just want to say, what you're saying is that this needs to be a fight to the death, a fight to the last man standing. Let me start with you, Mansour El Kikhia. Do you agree with that? This is about a strongman re-emerging. You already had one of those in Colonel Gaddafi. Does it need another strongman?
I hope not. I really do hope not. And the last thing I want to see is Libya falling back into a military dictatorship. I fought against Gaddafi for 40 years because he was a military dictator. It's not that. What I'm trying to tell you is very simple. I'm trying to tell you that ultimately the Libyans have to decide what they want to be. Those who want to have an Islamic State, they can have an Islamic State. They can be free to do what they want to do. Those who don't can be as well too. I mean, it's not a Catholic marriage. It really is not. We can live together. Czechoslovakia became Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to think outside the box.
Anas in London, I just want to bring you in here. A strong man needs to re-emerge. That's what we've heard. What do you think?
I think it's simple. I think, honestly, to go back to a policy-orientated or solution-orientated way forward is that we need to look away from the national level of political elites that are trying to either strike a grand bargain with each other or would actually separate the country between 2 or 3 different states, and look at the local level. A lot of the rifts that emerged, not only in the last 2-3 months of this conflict, but as Mustafa has rightly pointed out, since 2011, stem from this kind of polarizing, dehumanizing language that puts one camp in one area and says either, for example, if you're a Gaddafist, that somehow you have no right to the country and you have no right to play a role in the country and you have no right to govern locally in the way that you'd like to govern the country. Or if it's today in 2019 where we're talking about if we don't like this group, we'll call them theocratists, or we'll call them Islamists, or we'll call them terrorists, or we'll call them jihadists. That kind of language is not going to be good for anybody going down the line. And what Libya desperately needs is a reconciliation process along local tribal lines, around ethno-tribal lines, around city-states and around regions that would include things that are practical. So it could be a power-sharing agreement between different tribes that have fallen out since 2011. It could be a reconciliation process amongst some of the groups that have fought since 2011. But we have to abandon that really polarizing language and learn to live with one another.
And we are sadly running out of time. I'm going to have to stop you there because I do want to come to Mustafa in Paris. Our guests are saying there are options. It doesn't have to be violence. It doesn't have to be a strongman. Just very quickly, are you still convinced that there has to be a violent solution to the conflict in Libya?
Well, it's not that I am convincing. You know, I'm convinced or believe in violence as the only way. But I already said, you know, under the prevailing circumstances that we have been under since 2012, actually, there is no other way. And the reason I say this, how could you conduct a peaceful dialogue among equal Libyans in a inclusive process, you know, like the roadmap proposed by Mr. Ghassan Salama, the UN envoy, under the threat of militias and armed groups, and regardless of their ideology, even criminal groups who are cutting the roads, who are extorting and who are kidnapping people and for ransom and so on and so forth. How could you do that?
Sorry, we are out of time. Gentlemen, thank you very much, and thanks to all our guests, Mustafa Fattouri, Mansour El Kikhia and Anas Al Gomati. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.